There's always that person you look up to. The person that knows what's happening before you do, and the person that explains it all and doesn't make you feel stupid. Do you know what I'm talking about? Should I actually be watching Bravo? Is Jessica Simpson coming back? Is Shia LaBeouf really the style god of our time? Look, we all want that person in our lives, and in times like these, thank God it's Naomi Fry. My name is Jeremy Kirkland, and this is Blamo, a podcast exploring the world of fashion with the people who shape it. My guest this week is Naomi Fry, staff writer at The New Yorker. In our wide-ranging discussion, Fry explores what pop culture can teach us about ourselves, explains why she sees herself as a writer rather than a journalist, and demands answers for how Taylor Swift accomplished what she couldn't, even with 25 years of therapy. Because you are a professional journalist.
I guess so, even though I don't really... I tend to think of myself more as a writer because I'm not... But I have done reporting and stuff. I'm not like a hard journalist, I guess, even though I should probably not say that. But I'm more of I think of myself more as a culture writer, critic, I guess. But yeah, I guess I'm a journalist. I work for a magazine. Yeah.
You work for The New Yorker?
Yeah, I work for The New Yorker, yeah.
And what's the difference between a journalist and a writer?
I'm not exactly sure why I tend not to think of myself as a journalist, because I think by definition, if you work for a journal, you're a journalist. But I guess because the way my career developed, it's not like I've been... I was, an aspiring academic, and then I taught a bunch in like a college and a university.
Taught at NYU and RISD.
I taught at NYU and at RISD. Yes.
Just as a sidebar, that's like two of the most. That's like saying, oh, I played soccer for, Real Madrid and Manchester United.
Yeah, but I was like an adjunct, a very badly paid adjunct, and I didn't have like tenure. I also don't have a PhD. I have a master's, so my ability to be like a tenured professor, I mean, I think it's hard for everyone now, even people who have like really advanced degrees. But I wasn't really, I was kind of a failed academic. I went to grad school and I never finished. I didn't write my dissertation in English literature. So I only had my master's.
Wait, why did you not finish?
I decided that I didn't want to be an academic, I guess, and I just didn't really. I had a hard time writing my dissertation, and I love being a student. I didn't necessarily want to be a professor, I guess you could say.
Right.
And also, I think it is really, really difficult to get a job right now. Had I like loved it and been in love with it, then I would have done it, but I felt like it was too many hoops to jump through to make it to the other side of something I wasn't sure that I really wanted to do ultimately.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a long way to say like why I never finished. And then, yes, just to your, comment about how it's like, teaching at these good places. Yes, for sure. But also it's, there's a lot of like people more qualified than myself, also struggling through like the sort of adjunct lifestyle. Sure. It's, it's just like anything else nowadays with like quote unquote the gig economy. It's like what academia is turning into as well, not just, freelance journalism, freelance, like driving an Uber, whatever area you want to look at. It's, that's the direction things are going, unfortunately.
Right.
I guess the separation between writer and journalist, I guess I was always a writer, like even when I was in academia, like from when I was a child or whatever, and I just wrote things, for myself. Then when I was in college and in graduate school, but it wasn't really journalistic. So I didn't do it from the jump. I didn't like intern at a newspaper and then was like a junior court reporter, or, all the things you sort of, I think about when I hear the word.
You weren't like some gumshoe.
I wasn't a gumshoe, and I also didn't really work in magazine. Like the only job I had the first job I had in magazines in America, because I'm originally from Israel, which we can talk about later, but was being a fact checker at Us Weekly, which I've talked about a bunch on other podcasts. But and that's certainly not like what one thinks of when one thinks of like journalism, you know?
Right.
So I came into the world of magazines and newspapers relatively late in my life. I think that's kind of why I think of myself as a writer rather than a journalist.
Well, I think to a lot of people, you are, first off, in terms of your reputation amongst every other respected journalist, writer, pop culture fan, you are like the highest of high bars.
Oh.
No, I'm serious. So all the people that when I told people that I was going to talk to you, first off, every single person told me to make sure I say Nomi and not Naomi.
Thank you. Yeah.
And,
that's nice. Yeah.
And they were all just like, you should ask her just like the source. Like, what is her source? What is the source? And it's funny because that was my top question to talk to you about.
Okay.
And I say that because, you know, looking at your stuff that you've done for The New Yorker and, you know, everything, you have an ability to see everything before it becomes mainstream. And which is obviously probably a strong trait that you need for your job. But I mean, we're talking Shia stuff. We're talking like all the pop culture waves, like you see them before they crash. Like, how do you know that, and where does that come from?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, I'm glad if that's the way it seems. I think I'm probably basically the way I feel is like I'm always trying to keep up and like always on the verge of like, before it becomes like really pathetic, you know, like the jokes that people always say about the Times, like the Times is on it, you know, like sort of like doing a story like 7 years too late about a trend or something. I mean, God bless, I love the Times, and I don't think that's even necessarily true, but that's sort of a thing people say. But I always feel on the verge of that sort of cliche of like, you know, kind of running after whatever the trend or the cultural, you know, hot button issue is, or, but I mean, if I do manage to know, I guess what's going on in some capacity is, I think I just try to be attuned to people, whether it's on social media, or, it's, you know, just talking to people, meeting people, and trying to be, I guess just sensitive to what people are talking about and caring about. And I think this is actually interesting because I never really thought about this, but now that you're asking me this, I think it comes maybe from this is getting a little psychological, but it comes from a fear of like being humiliated.
Really?
Because I have
that fear, but I can't do what you do.
Because, well, I mean, you know, it doesn't come just from that. Obviously, I'm like very interested in culture. I'm like always, you know, that's the main thing. You have to be interested and you have to be curious. I think that's the main thing of like, how do you like, you know, keep tabs on what's going on, or like, how do you, so first of all, you have to care, which, you know, some people do, some people don't. Like, for instance, my husband definitely doesn't care as much about those kinds of things as I do. And so he doesn't seek it out. You know, he doesn't look out for it. He's interested in other things or in other modes of thought or like knowledge collecting, I guess. But he's not as interested in that sort of thing as I am. And so he won't be keeping abreast of things like I try to do. So I think interest and curiosity and like a desire to sort of keep up and know what's going on is, of course, the first thing that you need if you sort of want to try to know what's going on. And again, not that I always think that I do, but so that's the first thing. And the second thing is that fear of humiliation thing that I said. I think it's because I think of myself in a lot of ways as kind of an outsider, even though I know that's in other ways not completely true, or not totally true, or not at all true, maybe at this point. But I feel like I grew up, you know, I'm an immigrant. I came to America. I spent some of my childhood in America because my dad worked here some of the time, but I'm not American. Now I'm American. Now I have citizenship, but I mean,
Flex.
Yeah, yeah.
If that means anything anymore.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it means, but it's, for most of my life, I've been just, an Israeli citizen, and it took me a long time to get a green card. Then it took me a while to get citizenship. It was all a very long process. But my mentality is that of a person who's coming from the outside, which I am. I didn't really grow up here. I only came to live here full time in my mid-20s. And so I think I always was afraid of seeming like I don't know what's going on, which I often didn't, because I didn't. I remember coming when I was 10 years old, and we would come for the summers occasionally because my dad worked here, but I wouldn't, I would spend the whole year in Israel. My life was in Israel. And then suddenly we would come for a couple months. And
How old were you at this time?
I mean, this was every couple of years. We would come for the summer. So from when I was 5 to when I was
And where
15,
would you be coming here?
In Seattle.
In Seattle.
I was in Seattle.
Okay.
So, my parents would always sign me up for some day camp because they didn't, they had to do something with me. And I would go into camp. And this was, mind you, in the 80s. So it wasn't there wasn't the internet. It was harder to get knowledge in places that were farther out. And I would come in and I wouldn't know anything. They would be talking about I don't know. The kids would be. Yeah. They would be talking about Whitney Houston or whatever, the new album, or they would be talking about a movie that just came out,
Right.
I don't even know what Rocky IV, I don't. And
you could skip that one.
And right. Now I know that, but I didn't know that then, right? And so and because in Israel had much more limited, things took months and months to get to Israel, new movies and all of that.
Globalization wasn't really a thing.
Exactly. So everything moved much slower, and I would come and I wouldn't really know, or the way they were dressed, fashion, everything, all of those pop cultural markers. And I would feel very shy about it, and I would be kind of quiet, and I would listen, because I would be I didn't want to be humiliated. Which isn't to say, it's not my goal was to be in the center of the action and know everything at that point. I just didn't want to be embarrassed. So I was kind of quiet, because I knew I didn't know anything, and I would kind of try to piece together a puzzle out of little bits of information that I would hear people say, Right. I mean, this sounds like it was premeditated. Of course it wasn't. This is just, if I'm thinking back about how I would feel and act, I think it probably came from that, of trying to know what people were talking about and not totally letting on. Probably it was very obvious to people that I didn't know what was going on, but in my mind, I was I'm not embarrassing myself. I'm trying to understand what's happening and fit in. And again, not to be in the center of the group, but just not to be the nerd that knows nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that maybe, so I think interest and curiosity, but then I'm thinking that the other piece of this is, it's turned into, from fitting in, it's turned into okay, of course, there's my own interest and my own desires of what's interesting and good and, fascinating in my mind comes way more into play than it did when I was 8. And I was I should see Rocky IV, my taste has developed since then.
Well, it's because it's one thing to observe, and it's another thing to be able to, the way that you write, and I think why so many people love your writing and your ability to tell stories is there are writers who communicate about something and they speak to their reader as if they are dull and uninformed and need this information to be happy. And you communicate, the way that you write is a way of excitement and with curiosity, into which you kind of play along that you are the reader and you are exploring this excitement at the same time the reader is.
Yeah.
So the reader feels like they're alongside with you versus I'm learning from you and then I move on. Like it's a really rare thing. And when I was trying to look through all your writings and not like, overanalyze, but I was like, what is it that makes this so good and why so many people love this too? And I wonder if it's that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I think at least I try to, again, now that I'm thinking of this whole like outsider child perspective thing, of course, I do think that might have been the starting point, but I have developed since then to a position where I can say, this is why it's actually why X is actually interesting. Mm-hmm. This is why I look at it with interest. And for me, that sort of like attraction to something that's beyond, it's intellectual. A lot of it is intellectual, but it's also, there's something about it that has to be visceral, I guess, in a way. Mm-hmm. That's emotional. There's an emotional pull, or there's some level of desire that's like beyond just like, oh, this is, which is why I think like thinking about things like fashion or, it's things that have to do, that are cerebral in some ways, if you think about design, certain decisions the designers make or cultural influences that they use, but it's also emotional. Mm-hmm. And there's things like, even, I was just saying like cultural influences, those things they're beyond intellectual. They remind us of so many things about the way you felt when somebody said, did you watch Rocky IV, and you didn't know what they were talking about. Or if you finally watched it and you're like, that movie's amazing because X and Y,
Yeah.
Or that movie sucked because X and Y. And you remember like who you saw it with and what you were wearing and what you felt like. I don't know. Just like it's those things are as important probably as the sort of more analytical, I guess, way of looking at cultural objects. I mean, it's a very obvious thing to say. It
makes me wonder, when you write now, mm-hmm. are you writing to yourself at that age that didn't know what Rocky IV was?
In some ways. I mean, emotionally, always, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're doing okay then.
Yeah. I mean, emotionally, not consciously, of course, but yeah, it's about making myself interested in something. It's about impressing myself. It's about impressing other people. It's about trying to figure out something that it took me a long time to figure out in my own life, like why something is interesting to me. There's the thing that I'm a little bit afraid of, and that I don't know if there's exactly a solution. And I was talking about it with my husband the other day. It's like, how do you, I told him, I was like, I feel like I'm always writing about the same thing. I don't know exactly what that thing is, but I'm always writing about the same thing. And he was like, well, I mean, he was like, no, you're writing about different things and you make different points. And, mm-hmm. But someone's perspective and ideology and the way someone looks at the world, that's probably going to remain. Of course, people change over the course of their careers and whatever, but like, you are you. Your perspective is your perspective. And that's not a bad thing, which links up to the kind of emotional load, I guess, that you carry with you, and through which you see the world, if that makes sense. Because that's your history.
It totally does. And I think like Stephen King talks about that mm-hmm. a lot too, whom some people love him or hate him, but his book on writing.
Oh, I've heard that's really good.
It is really good.
Who told me that? I don't remember, but somebody I really admire said that it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, because he talks about a lot of different stuff, because, mm-hmm. Sobriety and et cetera. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that he says, and a lot of other writers have said this too, mm-hmm. I don't know if he coined it, but no one can no matter what other writer, what other education they have or perspective they have, no one will ever have your experience. And your experience is really what creates your perspective.
Yeah.
So there is no other person
Right.
that, lived between multiple cultures and traveled a ton, and then at the time that you did, and just it just doesn't exist, and it will
Right.
never ever be that case.
Right.
So that's one thing that you should always, look at as an advantage, and that you can use to your advantage rather to your disadvantage.
Right.
So
Right.
I mean, if you say you're writing about the same things all the time,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't look like that from what I've read.
Right, right. I mean, it's just that sometimes you get tired of yourself, what
Yeah.
it's like, because you your own story pretty well.
Should start a podcast then, and you just
and-
hear others.
Right. No, but I think it's true. Talking to other people is important because you get other perspectives. Reading other books, filling your life and your mind with the words and actions of other people it's hopefully goes away towards kind of alleviating that problem of like you're always saying the same thing, or you're just you and you get tired of your own story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
an example I would definitely want to discuss is, so when I walked in here, on the table, you had Jessica Simpson's, was it her autobiography or memoir? Or is that the same thing?
Well, I guess it's autobiography. I mean, I'm not sure. It might be, I think it says that it's a memoir, which she had a co-writer who I actually know.
But that book on the top of my head,
Yeah.
I would walk past that and I would never read it because
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't, with all due respect, I'm like, she's not someone I would ever think about.
Right.
But for you grab that and you're reading it. Why are you
I
reading
know
it?
it's interesting because I think a lot of people have been reading, people I'm like friends with, or people I've seen people online, that I like follow on Twitter or something talking about it, and it seems to kind of strike a certain nerve in a way that's maybe a little surprising for something that you would think, it's kind of like she was a sort of like quasi-Christian singer, and not a very
Father was her manager.
Yeah, Papa Joe.
Yep.
Not a very interesting musician, at least on the face of it. As far as I knew, I never really followed her music. I knew her as a cultural figure, then as a reality star, her love life, maybe a little bit trashy. Maybe she was considered a little bit dumb. All the things that she herself is talking about in her memoir. And I'm only like maybe a fourth of the way through or a third of the way through. I'm reading slowly. I'm savoring it. But it's interesting because it talks about a period. Basically, the period for me, the period it talks about mostly, or when it starts getting interesting, like when she gets famous, which is in the early 2000s. Because of course she starts from when she was born or whatever. But let's face it, like the really interesting thing is like, okay, and then like I had a hit record, and then what happened? Like when someone actually becomes famous.
Yeah.
Although her voice is like, it's actually a very kind of weirdly uplifting read, because she's like, I mean, she's religious, but it's not that exactly. I think it's about her journey. It's kind of inspiring. She I think later on she says she has problems with alcohol and with drug, so there's that whole facet to it, which I always love in a celebrity memoir. But I think for me, historically, quote unquote, like the period where she got famous was when it starts getting interesting is the period I came to live in America as an adult.
Oh, so here we go, tapping that nostalgia.
And so, or just like I remember, the days like sort of post 9/11, then like Iraq War, that whole sort of like mid 2000s celebrity culture.
MTV,
mania. Reality the reality television started sooner, but sort of like the beginnings of the enormous importance of reality television in American culture.
Because her show with
Nick Lachey was very, that's
like
what made her.
Newlyweds or something?
Newlyweds.
Yeah.
And I remember literally watching it. That was like my first year in grad school. So I was in grad school in Baltimore. I came there. I did not know anyone. I had a television. I remember my dad got me as a present. He got me all the DVDs of Sex and the City.
Yeah.
And because he came from Israel to help me like set up, to go to like IKEA or whatever. Yeah, no, it was very nice of him. It was it was great. My parents are really good, but and I would sit and I would watch Sex and the City.
Wow.
And which I had watched before, like I had seen it in Israel, but I just mean it was this sort of comfort, like rewatching. And I would watch MTV, and there was like Jessica and Nick, those were the years, like The Real World, Las Vegas, all of those like horrible.
Real World Vegas was really good.
Yeah, it was really good.
At the Palms.
That's
right.
Yeah, at the penthouse suite.
That's right.
Yeah, owned by the Maloof family. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I think for me, it's just interesting. It's, again, things I kind of remember viscerally through my own, as I'm sure many people do in a variety of ways, through my own experience of kind of living through it. And it was heightened for me because I had just come to America. So everything was like, it's like everything was a little brighter. Like now I'm like used to America. It's like now it's so, I've lived here so long that things probably don't hit me as hard. But at the time, it was like my first year in America, like living alone. I mean, without my parents. And
yeah, that's a big wake-up call for a lot of people.
The first time since I was like 15, so so I'm interested in that aspect of it, like to sort of like relive or remember, I guess myself through it in a weird way. And also I just love a celebrity memoir. And I love a story of like, I love famous people with problems. I love like just generally stories about people who struggle with like addiction and stuff like it's kind of my happy place. So
why do you love that?
I think it's something that I never experienced personally, but that I was fascinated by people who were able to go there, to sort of like, for whatever psychological or physical or, reason were, had gotten to a place where they allowed themselves to sort of self-destruct, I guess.
Right. You should read about a lot of musician memoirs now.
Oh, I've read a lot of musician. Yeah, I have a few shelves here that you can peruse after. Because I think I'm in a lot of ways, I'm a controlled and fearful person. So I would never, live.
But you want to vicariously.
That. But yeah, so vicariously, and I think I always had a fear, an unfounded fear that somehow I would find myself in that position. So it was all that was when I was younger. I think now one of the good things about getting older is that there are things that you're afraid are going to happen. I mean, knock wood, I'm not dead yet, so anything can happen. But like, when you were younger, you don't know where your life is going to go, right? Exactly. You don't know, like, am I going to be married? Am I going to be divorced? Am I going to like get addicted to heroin? Am I going to, I mean, who knows, right? Am I going to have like 4 kids? Am I going to have no kids? Like, so I think I was much more afraid of what's going to happen. Like, who knows what's going to happen? Probably something bad, and getting older has sort of alleviated some of those fears, at least. Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm probably too old to like be a teen runaway or something. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to happen. That's not part of the story. Probably also good things aren't going to happen, certain good things, but some bad things that I was afraid of aren't going to happen. But I think part of the fascination with stories like that was like kind of to try them out for size without actually really endangering myself or like taking risks.
And learning from these other people's experience.
Yeah.
Because it's not like some sort of love of
how a human destroys himself. It's
no, it's not. I don't wish, I never wished anybody ill, but of course, but it's just there's just something glamorous about it sometimes, especially when it involves like, music or Hollywood fame. It's about the difference between a person's outside and inside, which is always interesting. How things look versus what they actually are. You see like something that looks very beautiful, glamorous, wealthy, but it's actually things are like rotten to the core inside. There's always something fascinating about that.
Yeah.
Hey folks, I want to take a second and talk to you all about Mockingbird and thank them for supporting us this week. Especially in these somewhat uncertain times, I'm so grateful to all of our sponsors, but it speaks volumes when I see a smaller brand step it up. Mockingbird makes beautiful protective products for personal technology. I've been using Mockingbird's cases for my MacBook Pro and iPad mini and can't say enough good things about it. For me, the tech accessory world often feels like a compromise between utility or design. But Mockingbird's cases serve both. Their design aesthetic is minimal, and I love the subtle magnetic closure and suiting fabric lining they use. All their goods are made right here in small batches in the US. But Mockingbird is a benefit corporation, meaning that they meet the highest standards of verified social and environmental performance, public transparency, and legal accountability to balance profit and purpose. Benefit corporations are accelerating a global culture shift to redefine success in business and build a more inclusive and sustainable economy. A portion of their proceeds go to the Innocence Project, an organization that exonerates the wrongly convicted through DNA testing and reforms the criminal justice system to prevent future injustice. Check out their goods at www.buymockingbird.com or in the show notes on the pod. And stay tuned for an upcoming piece we're working on together. Check it out, Mockingbird. Visit bymckingbird.com. That's bymockingbird.com.
Do you know about Judee Sill, the musician?
Yeah,
1970s?
so I just saw that there was the did you see that they had like the forgotten obituary? You know how the Times does
snap,
this
no.
now? So the Times has this actually really nice thing where like people of the past who died, whenever, like 60s, some historical point, didn't get an obituary at the time because they weren't recognized.
No one knew that she died for a long time.
But have subsequently gained some prominence, or some people know, not necessarily that they became like super famous after dying, but that the Times deems them important enough to write an obituary after the fact. So actually, she had an obituary. This was like last week, a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, geez, I have to check it out.
Yeah, they just published it. And I looked at it, and I have to admit, I was looking.
Phenomenal folk singer and songwriter.
Right. So I was looking, and I was like, oh yeah, because I remember hearing about her, and I remember that she was, because I'm always like, oh, heroin addict, I need to look into this. And I said, oh, they did this obituary. They did this because I know that they're doing this project of like writing about forgotten people. But I have to admit I didn't. I need to go back and read the obituary. But they just published it, so look into it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is one of those things that like I really attribute stuff like Spotify and places where, when you think about how people are consuming music now, like way back in the day, the only music you heard on the radio was, in most cases, was new music.
Yeah.
So like the mainstream listener would be listening to new music all the time. And now, you think about how people listen to music in the digital era. A lot of, it's weird that songs that are 20 years old are charting. Where all of a sudden people are discovering Steely Dan the same time they're discovering Drake.
Yes.
And it's a place, for some reason, both of these artists who can be extremely different and have very different types of work be in the exact same level playing field.
Yeah.
And it's something I actually kind of love about how people listen to music digitally now.
Yeah.
To where, my little brother and I will make playlists and we send it back and forth to each other. And we'll always be adding like various super obscure, like there was a I think he was an Oxford professor named Pete Dello, who was
Okay.
like a huge influence on the Kinks and all this stuff. And
Okay.
yeah, like he had this thing called like Pete Dello and Friends. Someone will probably listen to this and correct me and say he taught somewhere else, but like he was a music professor, and his music is freaking insane.
So
But
this is like early 60s?
yeah,
or-
early 60s.
Yeah.
There's another band called Honeybus.
Okay,
That-
Honeybus. Okay, that's a good name.
It's banging. Their whole album just slaps. And they were totally eclipsed by the Beatles. Because the
Wow.
Beatles were like, people were like, oh, this sounds like the Beatles. I'd rather listen to the Beatles.
Sure.
But Honeybus, pretty good.
Okay.
But things like Spotify and all these other services now
Yeah.
will put this on there, and you hear this, and all of a sudden you can, time warp into this 1960, capsule where that band has the same sort of notoriety and play
Yeah.
as something else.
Oh yeah. That's really interesting. It's right. I mean, you do have to have the sort of curiosity and the need. Some people will just want to listen
To Drake.
to Drake, which is fine,
I guess.
but I mean,
Yeah, no,
it
I
is
hear
what it is. But but that's interesting because it's a little bit like the opposite of the sort of nostalgia thing, I guess, because it's like something that you don't have a context for, something that you don't have a memory of. Like, for instance, Steely Dan. When I was growing up, I have one sister. She's 7 years older, and she loved Steely Dan. When I was I was like 8, and she was 15, and she would listen to Steely Dan, and so I grew up with Steely Dan.
Okay.
So for me, when I hear Steely Dan now, it brings back all of these like very specific memories,
Right.
or like I like know all the. Maybe not all this, but like I'm familiar with it.
Which album was she listening to?
She would listen to Aja, Katie Lyde, like all of them. Like
Correct.
she had like, yeah. I mean, she had them on tape. This was the era of tapes.
Yeah.
And I would just hear it, all the time because she listened to it. So if it comes up on the radio now, it brings up a very specific feeling. And I didn't even actually at the time, if I'm thinking about it now, I didn't really have a context for it. Because because I'm like 8 or 7 or whatever, and I'm listening to this music, and it's just music my sister likes. But subsequently, many years later, in my 20s or 30s or whatever, I'm like, oh, Steely Dan, they went to bar. They did, you get all the whatever context of like what it meant for culture and where they were situated, which I completely didn't have. So that was my Spotify experience when I was like 7, listening to my sister. When you overhear something.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm like that. I think for some reason, because I don't really have that good of a relationship with my dad anymore, because my dad has had Parkinson's for so long, I don't really get to have the adult conversations that like people my age would have with their parents. So I'm like constantly trying to find some way to connect to him through the music that he listened to or was a part of at that era. So I basically am only, my dad played with Dan Peake from America and all those guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so but I remember him showing me America when I was younger and me being like, this stuff sucks. Like, I want to listen to Michael Jackson, Dad.
Sure.
And now I'm listening to America and I'm like, oh, I remember when my dad showed me this. I wish I wasn't such an idiot.
Yeah. Well, right. But you wanted to listen to Drake or whatever, to the Drake of the...
Yeah, to the Drake of the era.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just very fascinating, and I did not expect any of these answers or responses that I'm getting for you. So I want to jump to a different part of this because, first off, you've single-handedly achieved every cool job to have, from writing from the New Yorker, copy editing Us Weekly, working at the New York Times,
fact checking in Us Weekly.
Okay, fact checking. It's the same thing. It's all about the same.
Yeah.
And obviously you taught at RISD and NYU, also taught James Franco, which is, we don't have to discuss. What jobs have you had that you don't think are cool or you aren't particularly proud of?
Oh, many jobs. I mean, like all the jobs I had in high school, for instance. I worked at an ice cream store
Okay.
When it was all throughout senior year. And I always was it's all fine jobs. Like, again, no job is like
Sure. There's
horrible. There's nothing.
I mean, I was a dishwasher when I was 14.
Everybody did, what they had to do. But I worked and this is back in Israel. This was in Haifa where I grew up. I worked at a ice cream store, and I was always really anxious that there was like a big refrigerator in the back where you kept, there was like this display case. There was a walk-in. And I remember one time I thought that because the owner was always like, make sure that the temperature, that the door is closed, he like put the fear of God into me or something, I guess. Right. And I kept being like, oh my God, it's like, it's the temperature is going up. It's all going to melt. Like, I just remember being very anxious all the time that something was going to go wrong with like the walk-in refrigerator.
That's awesome. Well, you were a good employee, it sounds like.
I'm always a very sort of, or for the most part, I think I'm an anxious and responsive employee. Yeah. For better or worse. That was one job. I was a waitress in high school in a at least a couple places. And I was a very bad waitress. And that was another job where I was very anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was always like, people are going to like yell at me, like things aren't coming out fast enough. The
service industry is so thankless.
Yeah. It wasn't like it wasn't a great experience.
Yeah. So there's something, as you're the person who understands culture way before everyone else does, there's something that has kind of started to happen these days. And that is like this rise of like overt sharing and acceptance in culture, and like really, really loving yourself no matter what, and
self-care and self-love.
Super big self-care and self-love. So how do you feel about this rise of like happy and acceptance culture? And do you ever feel people are trying to jump on the bandwagon that don't deserve it? Or is believing that a part of the problem?
Okay. I think generally it's a good thing, obviously. Mm-hmm. I would like to have some of that myself. Like, I would like to know the secrets of how to achieve self-acceptance and self-love, for sure. I think this has been, written about a lot by, many people, but I think obviously this is also something that has become very commodified, the kind of like everybody's selling self-care and self-love now, right?
Yeah.
It's like a lot of the time, the promise now, instead of like, oh, you have to kill yourself with a diet, now we're selling like, oh, take these supplements and use this like, I don't know, like face oil or something in order to like accept yourself. It's just like any other product. It's become a kind of thing that you can, the promise of the purchase, the promise of what you will achieve, the self-love and self-care and self-acceptance you will achieve once you buy our product is of course, it's a
little Terry Gilliam Brazil type thing.
Or the sort of snake oily. So obviously that's an issue with that many people have written about, like the wellness industry is, but I'm in two minds about it. Like, I was watching the new Goop show, for instance, the Gwyneth Paltrow show on Netflix, which is like, her staff go and do these experiences that are supposed to lead to, greater, wellness, like women's sexuality, knowing your sexuality, or like coming to terms with past trauma by doing ayahuasca, or no, they were doing mushrooms there, whatever, like psychedelic experiences, all of these like various avenues that you can take to sort of better yourself and get the most out of life and learn to live with yourself happily and peacefully. And in some ways, it's ridiculous because, again, it's like obviously all built around this product, and Gwyneth herself. It is
built around a capitalist mindset.
Yes, 100%. But in other ways, I was looking at it and I was like, maybe I should take mushrooms and learn to love myself. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not, these things aren't intrinsically bad, or intrinsically like a swindle. I guess it's I have conflicted feelings about it.
Yeah.
I guess.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And I'm with you on that. But yeah. There's like a circumventing nature of just like, how can I get happy fast?
Yes.
When so much of, therapy and all these other things are really about unpacking years and years of experience on your life.
Totally.
And there's not really a pill or a candle or an experience that you can do that can just pretend that didn't exist or shape who you are.
Totally. No, I think I fully agree with that. And I was also, I was sorry, I'm shouting out Netflix again. I was watching the Taylor Swift documentary. I don't know if you saw it.
I haven't, but it's very high on my list.
Yeah, it's interesting. And she is talking about how she grew up as a young performer, as a high achieving, extremely talented, prodigy, essentially, where the only happiness she knew what happiness was only as it related to pleasing other people and getting sort of pats on the head from the audiences, managers, like whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
She was definitely on her way to be like our era's Dolly Parton.
Yeah. I mean,
until
and people
she spoke out. Yeah.
And people loved her, but then of course the tide turned, people then hated. Basically it's all about how I dealt with people sort of like rejecting me.
Right.
And how I learned that the path towards happiness isn't in looking outward, but it's about self-acceptance, et cetera, self-love. But the part that was missing was, how did she do that? If indeed it's true that she managed to detach her expectations of what happiness means from pleasing her audience, et cetera. How did she do that?
Oh.
That's not, and I was like, tell me, Taylor, because I want to learn, I want to, because it's a lesson. It's an important lesson.
Sure.
I've been working on it in therapy for like literally 25 years now.
Right.
I mean, off and on,
Sure.
but mostly on, let's face it. So it's like, how, and that's the big question, how do we do it? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how South Park is going to handle this.
Yeah.
How do you report or write about things that you love but remain unbiased? Or do you believe every writer is biased?
Yeah, I think every writer is biased. I mean, I think to a certain extent, we're people. So it's hard to separate your own opinions and preferences. And it's, in fact, maybe it always is interesting to me, or I admire it, I guess, but it's sort of alien to me when I see people who seem pretty objective, like especially people who report on politics or who report on the court system, or any sort of hard news topic, but where emotions and opinions run hot, because I don't know that I really would be able to do that, or at least I would feel like a really strong push and pull between, which is why I'm probably more of a critic, rather than, I'm not a political reporter. Because I remember seeing there was that documentary series, The Fourth Estate, about the Times. I don't know if you saw it. It was on Showtime, I think, a couple of years ago. It was good, but there was one of the guys who I forget which reporter it was, but he's a White House correspondent, and he said that he even goes as far as to not vote because he wants to remain basically being like a total vessel for the news. And I was like, wow, that's intense, because how is that possible? So for me that's very alien. Of course, that's kind of an extreme position, I guess, or what seems to me an extreme position, because I'm a woman of opinions, I guess, and feelings. So yeah, I think every writer is biased. That said, of course, you should try to look at things in their entirety and from both sides, as they say. Yeah.
You're friends with John Mayer.
Mayer, yeah.
How did that happen?
I hounded him for years.
Yeah?
Yeah. Very publicly, not in any underhanded way. I mean, this all happened in public.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, this is a story I've told many times, but I begged him to follow me on Twitter for years. I essentially trolled him like lovingly, not troll but when he followed me on Twitter, then he left Twitter, and I was like, all of this was for nothing? My God, like, this is terrible. But then I sort of hounded him to follow me on Instagram. Basically, in the end, it worked. I don't know what to tell you. I'm a lucky lady.
Why does everyone like John Mayer so much?
I don't know. He's really funny. He is
I like him too.
Culturally omnivorous.
Oh.
He takes himself a little seriously, but not too seriously in some ways, probably. He's clever. He's like quick and clever.
Yeah.
He's obviously very handsome. That's probably a reason a lot of people like him.
Yeah.
He's interested in clothes.
He's like the Brad Pitt of music.
Interesting. Say more.
Well,
in what way?
Because...
Oh, like that Brad is interested in architecture or something, or whatever it is?
Because everyone loves Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt is out there enough that you feel a connection to him, but you don't really know that much about him.
Yeah.
Like, he'll do interviews, and he'll get really serious about stuff, but then that's about it, and you don't really know that much about him. And I feel like John Mayer's about that.
Yeah.
And they also are, like, attached to things that are really strong in people's, like, experience. So, films...
sure,
culturally significant films,
songs
music,
that everybody knows,
songs
movies
that
everyone knows.
Yeah. But they're also like they get manipulated through the experience that someone has experiencing their content, right?
Yes.
So my interpretation of John Mayer or Brad Pitt is based through the art that they've created that I experienced through.
Sure.
So I don't always.
Yeah, of course.
But then both of those people have done pretty, from a normal perspective, pretty disruptive and strongly hurtful things towards others publicly. And people's have.
You mean in their like
love
lives?
Yeah, like to be
Brad,
more blunt, they've both been pretty trashy to women,
right?
But people have a lot of sympathy for them, because they come out apologetic.
Yeah, I feel like in the case of John, I obviously can't speak for him, but just I don't know enough about it, but just from kind of general impression, it seems to me that he really like took a step back from being public, and I think that's worked well for him, it seems, because he, for a while now, that period of like the high tabloid era, he was really out there. You know?
And both of those guys, the high tabloid era was when they were associated with other high tabloid significant others.
Exactly. And I think it seems that both of them have really pulled back from that storyline. So good for them.
Yeah.
It's live and learn, I think that's a great thing.
At the end of the day, too, I want both of them to win so bad.
Me too.
Brad Pitt's
Brad is
a theory,
unreal. Like Brad is like, this is the moment of Brad,
right?
Yeah.
There's a theory that Brad Pitt didn't write any of his acceptance speeches.
Oh, really? I didn't. Oh, acceptance speeches in the plural,
speeches. So every recent award he's won, he's given an acceptance speech that is pretty unbelievable.
Yeah,
and he's said that he just winged it.
He said he winged it, but people have been saying
he wrote it and he winged that himself. But like his Oscar speech, his BAFTA speech, which he wasn't there for, but he had Margot Robbie read.
Oh,
and then he won.
No, I
another
didn't hear
award.
that. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I could see that. At least with the Oscar, I didn't hear the BAFTA one, but with the Oscar one, it was pretty sharp and sort of, it was like a little political, and it was like,
It was really well done.
Yeah.
Then he quotes the movie back, shouts out Leo.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a few things I want to ask you.
Yes.
I'm going to call this Fry manners.
Okay.
How do you feel about AirPods in public?
I hate AirPods.
Why?
they look stupid. I'll die on this hill.
Go for it.
Apologies to my friend Chris Black. This is our ongoing.
I think Chris will live.
Yes, no, he will, and he knows my stance. Yeah.
How do you feel? How do you order food at a restaurant?
In what way? How?
Do you make eye contact? Do you
Yeah.
greet the waiter? Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Good. Oh,
I mean, I think so. I mean, now I'm doubting myself, but yeah, for sure. Like, be friendly. Yeah.
I went out to dinner the other night, and a friend of mine, and I realized this. He never makes eye contact with the waiters or waitress.
Really?
Yeah. Or the waiter. I guess they don't need to be singled
Yeah.
out by their sex. So, but yeah, he never makes eye contact.
Interesting.
And I'm like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah. No, I think I definitely make eye contact and say hi, and yeah.
Phone etiquette.
Yes.
What's your phone etiquette?
I'm probably pretty bad with that.
Yeah.
Just because I'm like most people, I'm addicted to my phone, but I'm trying to get better about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, certainly if I mean, I'm probably the worst with it with my family because I know they'll like love me no matter what and forgive me. Yeah. Like, if I go out with a friend, I probably will be not bad with it, but I could be better probably.
What's not bad?
I mean, I will look at the screen. I'll turn my phone down, or I'll keep it in my bag.
Oh, okay. You'll turn your phone down.
No,
See,
not down. Not
thing.
down. Like on the other, like upside. Like yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. A lot of times, like, people are like, no phones at a table, or phones at a table, but the display is face down.
Right. Display. I do display face down usually, but
That's very generous.
But it's hard. It's hard.
Well, but see, because you work in an era and field where.
But I'm also just addicted. I'm bad.
Yeah.
It's not even just. I mean, there's excuses, and I definitely do think that social media and it is pretty imperative to what I do. But I don't want to excuse myself. It's too much, and I need to. But how? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty much addicted, and I
Yeah.
also use it for work, which is my crutch because I'm like, I need this.
Yeah. I mean, I do need this, but I don't need it probably as much, and things could wait, likely, but I don't like to wait for things, and I'm just like constantly needing that like rush,
Yeah.
Not good.
Well, I can't thank you enough for chatting. I really appreciate your candor and everything. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, it was great. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Blamo. Our theme music is by Breakmaster Cylinder, editing by Brendan Finn, and we're produced by Blamo Media. Follow along with us on Instagram at Blamo Podcast and leave a review for us on your favorite podcast app. If you want even more Blamo, head over to patreon.com/Blamo to join the Blam fam and get access to additional interviews, a community Slack, special events, and more. Best of all, you're supporting the show. Try it. It feels good. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.